Thank you.
Uh,
That would be very cool.
yeah, and Lee, all the documents are also on Canvas. So the documents I just went through are all up on Canvas, so you can go through it on your own time. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I've been trying to force myself to sleep later since yesterday, but it didn't seem to be working very well.
You're still jet lagged?
No, I actually don't really have jet lag, and now it's a problem. It's because I sleep so early and wake up so early now.
Mm. How before we move on, how are things in China? Are things starting to open up again, or is it still on lockdown?
Honestly, I don't quite know because once I arrived here, I've been put into mandatory quarantine in a hotel with like government like uh, like health workers sort of making this entire area like a quarantine zone. So we're not allowed to get out or anything. So I don't really know what's going on outside. We'll see after I leave here on the 16th. I
Yeah.
heard a lot of
Well,
things are starting to open up, but they also have the worry of the second wave coming back.
okay.
So like they're still kind of cautious, but we'll see how it goes.
Yep. Interesting.
I have a
That's
question.
yes.
Um, for all of these different, for the companies that we choose to do, are we going to go out ourselves and find resources or like to get context on them, or will you guys be providing any background context for each of the businesses?
That's a great question, and I forgot to talk about that. So the answer to the second question is no. We're not going to provide any background information. That's part of the project to try to go out and try to find information on the different businesses. But to the first part of your question, most of these businesses are pre-IPO, so you won't find any financials or at least not comprehensive financials or annual reports or anything online. So it might be hard to do detailed information or analysis on financials, but we don't require that either for this project. As long as you kind of get a sense of the size of the market and how fast the business has been growing and that kind of stuff, that should be fine. Well, if you want to, you can try to dig around and find financials and do a more comprehensive analysis, but it's not required. Like Rick said, it's more a conceptual class in that way, and these assignments follow that. So I hope that answered your question, Jaden.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you. So if there's no more questions, I'll go into my little mini lecture on online marketplaces. Now you know that you'll have to do a case over the next week on an open table, and then you'll have to also do a term project over the next month on a marketplace business. So it's suitable that I go through my experience with marketplaces and mention some of the heuristics of how to evaluate if an online marketplace is attractive or not. So that's what we're going to do for the next maybe 20 to 30 minutes. So first, before I go into that, I made a little introduction slide. I did an introduction earlier, but I want to include some of these pictures since we're on video conferencing, and that might be a better way to familiarize with you guys. So I was doing May term 8 years ago. I graduated from Westminster College in 2012. I was a part of the ski team, just like I believe it was one person here who was a part of the ski team. Was that Alex? So probably have had the same experience with going up to Park City at 5 a.m. in the morning the whole winter, at least in the preseason. And that was a privilege to be able to ski next to getting an education. So looking back on that with great joy. We even won the championship in 2011, the UCSA championship. That's a picture up there in the lower left corner. I picked up cycling when I lived in Salt Lake, so every time I was stressed for a final or something, I took my bike and I went up Emigration in East Canyon. So I had a great time in Salt Lake, and that's why I kind of wanted to contribute to this May-term course, because it's a great institution, and May-term is just a great way of getting a bit more creative education, especially in the finance department. Currently, I'm spending my time evaluating if we should build out more broadband or mobile infrastructure in Norway. Many people have heard about 5G, and we're thinking a lot about that, if we should swap out our 4G network, mobile network, with 5G, and when we're going to do it. So that's a big debate. And we're putting cables in the ground to provide fiber networks to people who need them, and we're all sitting on some network right now, so I guess especially during this period, we're happy with put cables in the ground in the past. So if you have any questions about that too, we can talk about that another time. So why am I qualified to talk to you about marketplace investments? It's because when I joined Telenor in 2015, I joined a corporate venture capital arm called Telenor Digital Businesses. So Telenor is a global telecommunications operator originating from Norway, 160 years old. It operates in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and then in Asia, in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malaysia, Myanmar, and is it one more country? No, I think that's it. Five countries in Asia. And what we did was that I came into an organization that was responsible for investment in marketplaces. So that's what you're seeing in the left box. So together with other investors, Telenor owned marketplaces in several different countries, many that overlap with their mobile operations. So they thought, since online marketplaces generate so much internet traffic, they could use it also to understand and sell mobile subscriptions, especially in countries in Asia where it's really hard to market to people. So the other side of that was that, okay, we were owning generalist sites in all these countries, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, etc. And how could we learn how to build new great marketplace models in these businesses? How could we create a better strategy for them? So we got an opportunity to invest like a limited partner. Some of you might know the term. A limited partner is a company that invests into a fund, and they take that investment and they make singular investments in singular companies. So you're exposed to the portfolio. And that fund is called FJ Labs, and they're in New York City. And over that time frame that I was there, we invested in a bit over 120 marketplace companies. So you really quickly start to see what works and what doesn't work. At the same time, FJ Labs is put together by a person who started OLX, which is basically Craigslist for emerging markets. And he's an entrepreneur. So they have also an ambition to start 1 to 3 businesses every year. So when we invested in the fund, they started 3 businesses, and we'll get back to one of them later in the presentation. So we learned a great deal from just being an investor, and we put many of those learnings into the strategy of these generalist marketplaces in Asia. So so it was just a great investment strategy to understand more and be a better manager of online marketplaces.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What exactly is the definition of an online marketplace?
That's a great question. So an online marketplace is it's kind of, you can look at it as simple as a shared database. So Craigslist is kind of a shared database where everything is categorized, and you're allowed to search through the directory on location, on price, on what type of item it is. So that's the easiest definition. And then once you add more features to it, it becomes a bit more complex. But that's the easiest definition. I would say a shared database online that allows suppliers and consumers to meet across geographies and transact. I should have had a better definition. I just made that up, but that's what I've heard before. Thanks for that question. Just feel free to jump in with questions as I go along. If you wonder about something, just like the question we just had, it's great to have a dialogue on some of these things. So why am I now operating investments in mobile and broadband infrastructure? Is because Telenor as a business decided that they wanted to exit marketplaces as an industry because they didn't believe in it for the overall strategy anymore. They thought they were not the best owner. So we worked a lot with the M&A team to sell OLX in Brazil, and we sold all the Asian assets to a company called Carousel. Some might be familiar with it. It's online. It's a mobile first. It's Craigslist on mobile basically. So it's a horizontal marketplace on mobile. The reason it worked out so well in Asia is because most people don't have a desktop computer in those countries, but they have a smartphone. So that's the only way they can list. So many companies have tried to expand to Asia, and let's say Craigslist was going to expand to Asia, and they tried with the same strategy, the same model for desktop computers. And when people don't have them, there's no traffic there and there's no listings. And that means that it's not very interesting to go in and try to buy things there. So Carousel did well because they caught the wave of mobile phones in Asia. So we sold our Asian assets to that company. And then I worked a lot with the M&A team in this process, and we ended up with an acquisition of the mobile operator DNA in Finland. And I believe we have, did I count 2 Finnish people in the class? I guess Victor and Niklas are familiar with this business. It's kind of the Verizon of Finland. And that's how I got into investments in mobile and broadband infrastructure. So before we leave my story, I would just do a little note on why corporate ventures don't really work. So this was a corporate venture fund. It means that a big business sets aside cash to invest in high growth businesses or technology companies. They do this most of the time for the benefit of the PR that they get from it. And they might be able to attract a lot of talent, and the CEOs and management team might be able to appear as more interesting. But here's the thing. Big corporations, just like Telenor, they provide a profit. So they're a mature company. They get profits every year that are really easy for analysts to anticipate. And it's a dividend-driven stock. So the shareholders would rather get dividends instead of investing the funds with professional, and instead invest the funds with professional investors, because they don't believe that the company like Telenor can manage this capital into marketplace investments. Corporations generally can't have a similar compensation scheme as normal venture capital funds do. Some of you might be familiar with the 2%, normally it's 2% management fee that you take every year, and then you get 20% of the upside. So corporations won't really have the opportunity to attract the best management. And the distributions from exit, so an exit is if you're selling one of the companies, you get a distribution, a cash distribution. So these are really hard to time, and they're not recurring because you don't really know. It only happens once, and you don't really know when it's going to happen. And it has a really small effect on the cash flows of the entire business. So it doesn't have anything to say for the dividend payment, for instance. And it's really hard to guide the market on when this extra cash flow is gonna come. So a learning from me from this experience, if you're ever faced with, or if you're ever offered a job in a corporate venture capital fund, think about if it's close to the core operation. If it's not close to the core operation, you should be a bit skeptical about joining it, because once the tide turn on the strategy and operations, it will probably not be prioritized. So that's my 2 cents on corporate venture funds. Okay, let's get back into to marketplaces. And any questions or comments on the last part? Okay, let's dig into marketplaces. So the evolution of marketplaces. It all starts with an offer. So it's been around for a long time. Somebody wanting to sell something, somebody wanting to offer someone a job, somebody wanting to sell their car, somebody wanting to rent out their apartment. And internet has really enabled the proliferation of marketplaces, because it has really opened up geographies and supply and categories in a different way. So it started with classifieds 1.0, as many people call it. That was newspapers. You might have seen it in the old movies where people sit and draw red circles around job listings. So that was the start of the classifieds. The thing was, it was local reach, so it was limited to the local newspaper, and it had the editorial constraint. So the newspaper only had a set amount of pages that they could put classified listings on, and you had to contact them and apply for the listing for every new newspaper. So that was a cumbersome process, and it took 30 hours to list. And once the newspaper was consumed or read and thrown away, that listing would not be active anymore. So you had to kind of apply for a new one. Then came classifieds 2.0. So what simply happened is that these listings from the newspapers, they moved online, and they were put into a searchable shared database. So that is essentially what Craigslist is. So it is built for a desktop computer. It's search optimized for category and geography. So that means that everything is tagged with, or you need, when you're doing a listing, you need to tag the item so other people can search for it, and they can search for it within a certain city or country. And that took, in the beginning, 30 minutes to list, because all the listings had to be approved manually to avoid bad listings. So in some countries, some users could even be charged for listing on generalist marketplaces like Craigslist. So I remember in Norway, when you did listings on the horizontal marketplace here, that's called FINC.no or find.no in English, you had to call in and pay by phone. So it took a day for the listing to show up. So it was still not that efficient back then. But what happened is that as these classified sites grew, like Craigslist, they were able to achieve close to 10% of the daily internet traffic in a country. So that's huge. And that means that it's really valuable for advertisers to buy space, so display advertising, and it's really valuable for dealers, brokers, and human resources to post listings for cars, apartments, and jobs. And people are willing to pay to list cars, apartments, and jobs, but they're not willing to pay to list their bike or their used tennis racket or whatever they may sell on the generalist marketplace. So sites used the traffic from the generalist marketplace to expand into all these other categories: jobs, real estate, and cars. So generally, in an EU study that a study that we did in the European Union, generalist market, the generalist side of marketplaces is about 13% of the revenue, while cars and real estate is 30% each, and job is 26%. So you very quickly get into wanting to add these other categories. And that leads us into Classifieds 3.0. And that was basically taking Craigslist and building it for mobile. And we've seen a few companies do this. In the US, you're probably familiar with Letgo. Have any used Letgo? Have anyone used Craigslist? I guess yes.
Maybe Craigslist, but not the other one.
Yeah. So Letgo is a mobile-first marketplace in the US. In Europe, there's one called Wallapop, which originated out of Spain, and then the one we mentioned previously in Singapore or Asia is called Carousel. And what they essentially did is that they used the technology in the phone for photo and location-based discovery. So once you take a picture of something, it understands what kind of item it is, and it also understands, because there's a geotag on the picture, it understands where you are. So it populates the listing really quickly to get more listings into the marketplace. And from what we mentioned previously about traffic and it being very attractive for others to advertise there, generating listings by using technology is something we've seen in Classifieds 3.0. But the thing in the US, the reason you guys probably haven't heard about Letgo is because it's very hard to compete against Craigslist. So why is it hard to compete against Craigslist? The business haven't even done any interface updates or design updates for the last 2 decades. The thing is, huh?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask a question.
Yeah.
Just
Feel
like,
free.
so if you're talking about like just online marketplaces and like, I mean with Craigslist and stuff like that, are you saying that like Craigslist is hard to like, I mean, for other companies to get in and be used because it's like a simple concept, or because nobody's just like thought of anything to change it? Because I mean, they're all mobile, like, you know, shopping marketplaces, and like, you know, they all kind of provide the same service.
Yes, that's a great question. They provide the same service. It's that's the key. It's like we said, it's a shared database. So where's the value with Craigslist? Why is Craigslist able to defend against a marketplace like Letgo that invests millions and millions of dollars into building interfaces, building functionality, building all these things, while Craigslist is not even investing in updating their user interface on the web? The answer is that once a marketplace has built the supply and demand side, it's really hard to challenge. And that means that you build supply for a marketplace like Craigslist. That means that you aggregate the people who wants to list. And it's attractive to list things on Craigslist because you know that there's high demand. There's many people who wants to buy something on Craigslist. So you start building traffic on both sides. So that's the kind of the flywheel that is really hard to compete against, because once you get up to 10% internet traffic, it doesn't matter if Craigslist has a poor interface and Letgo has a good one. You know that the probability of you selling your stuff or buying or getting a wider selection of stuff to buy is higher on Craigslist, so you're going to stick to that service. And that's what the market is doing. So that was did that answer your question, Damien? That was a good question.
Yeah, that totally did. So.
Yes. So in Asia, it's different. That's the last point on this slide. That carousel was successful in Asia because there was simply not any people didn't have desktop computers, or most people. So they had a smartphone, so that was the only place where they could go. So all the Western companies tried to expand and essentially built Craigslist for Asia, but they failed to understand that there was never going to be any traffic on desktop. Okay, and then we get to Classifieds 4.0 that we're gonna focus on for the next part of the presentation. They're optimized for one category only, and they add features, so it makes it, you will understand more about the product you are buying, and they facilitate parts of the transaction, so the marketplace gains more trust. So it makes it really convenient to list, and it makes it really convenient to buy. Airbnb is a great example of a marketplace that is optimized for one category. We'll get into that more later. So more innovation will be created in 4.0, what we call verticalization of horizontal marketplaces. So this is a pretty popular, I didn't make this, but it's a very popular illustration that is created by a gentleman called David Haber. And it just shows how in the last 10 years, how every category in Craigslist has really been attacked by smaller marketplaces that has focused on one category. And we call that verticalization of horizontal marketplaces. So you see on these logos here that there are many great businesses that's been able to take a single category on Craigslist and just build a better product out of it. So it's worth taking a step back. When we see that illustration, it's worth taking a step back and think about what are the ideal conditions for creating a marketplace business. Because these 50 or so logos shows that it has been possible and it's still possible. But you just have to look for the right things. So the first thing you have to look for is fragmented supply and fragmented demand. So a lot of people wanting to buy something and a lot of people / businesses wanting to sell something, but there's no marketplace where you can transact. There's no marketplace that gives one single point of communication. So communication is broken. It's very difficult to discover offers, especially when you move outside of local geographies. There's low price transparency, so it's very hard to determine value. I'm not sure if, when I was at Westminster, I had a Subaru Legacy that I drove to the mountains all the time. And when I moved back to Norway, I sold that car. So the thing in the US is that you have this thing called Kelley Blue Book that helps you decide the value of the car. So it's easier to understand what your car is worth. But in other countries, like for instance, Brazil or some markets in Asia and even some in Europe, it's really hard to, when you don't have a tool like Kelley Blue Book, it's really hard for individual people to understand, okay, how much should I list my car for? How much is it worth? I have a dent in my door. Should I subtract $1,000 or $500 and all these things? So that's what I mean by price transparency. It's just an example with cars, but there's also many other things, homes, etc. The next thing is that there's a low level of trust in the population. So people are less inclined to trust in other people, that the products they sell are intact, that they can meet them at their homes, stuff like that. The next thing is that payment is offline. So many people think it's not secure to transact or would want it to be facilitated in some kind of way. And the last part is that logistics is cumbersome. So you need to arrange a place to meet. You need to maybe drive somewhere or arrange shipping. And all of these points can be summarized in one word. It's called friction. And you hear venture capitalists or people in the marketplace industry talk about it all the time. Remove friction. That means that they're trying to remove some of these points or a collection of them. Okay. So what are some examples of this? So successful verticals adds information and features. So what does this really mean? So it's useful to look at these two examples. So let's start with the one on the left. That's a secondary marketplace for tickets called StubHub. So what StubHub did is that they understood that for tickets, you needed to prove that they were authentic and create a place where people trusted that they could buy secondhand tickets, both for listings and purchase. So if I wanted to go to a Utah Jazz game when I was at Westminster, I saw a lot of Jazz games. I thought basketball is my favorite American sport. But if it was Jazz against the Lakers and it was a big game, I might not even be able to get tickets. So I could go on Craigslist and get the ticket, but how would I know if it was authentic? Or how would I make sure that I can meet that person or get that ticket mailed before the game started? I could go to a scalper outside of the stadium, but then again, I wouldn't be able to trust if that ticket was authentic, and he might be able to rip me off. The thing with StubHub is that I would, as a buyer, I could go there and I could find the tickets, I could see the price, I could go in and look at the map of the stadium, see the exact place where the seat was assigned, and I would know that it was secured to buy it. They also offer a warranty, so that's examples of features that builds trust. The second example is Airbnb. So I just pulled this the other day. It was a listing in Oslo. You could put that listing on Craigslist, so that's fine, but there's so many things that you would know before you try to rent an apartment. How many rooms is there? How many beds is there? How many bathrooms? Is there an elevator? Does it have parking? Is it a kitchen? Does it have Wi-Fi? How much does it cost? When is it available? Is there a calendar? All these things. Does it have a washer dryer if you're going to stay there for a long time? Does it have a cancellation policy? Has the person dealt with a lot of people before so they can be a super host? And that's how Airbnb added a lot of information, and they added the social side of it. Reviews, super hosts. So you would be more inclined to trust that the person renting out the apartment was actually operating in good faith, and you would go along with doing the transaction, or you would be more inclined to. Any questions before I move on? Okay, great. I hope this is useful for you guys. Okay, the next category we'll look at, we're going to do this a little bit faster. So this is a company called Backmarket, and you can choose this company for your term project. So that's why it's useful to spend a little bit of time on it. So Backmarket is selling refurbished electronics, smartphones, computers, vacuum cleaners, that kind of stuff. So we have started to do the same thing in Telenor, where we take refurbished phones and we sell them back to the marketplace. So the way you're doing this is that you're adding features. So let's do another example with Craigslist. Let's say I was going to try to build a marketplace business, and I went into Craigslist and I saw, wow, there's a lot of these listings are electronics or mobile phones. I should build a marketplace business on refurbished mobile phones. But if I try to just simply build a website and try to get people to list their mobile phones there, I would not get off the ground. And that's because I'm not adding anything extra to what Craigslist is already doing. And remember Damien's question previously, if you haven't created the demand and supply side, you don't have the most valuable aspect of being an online marketplace. So I would never get any traffic on my site. But what Backmarket did is that they added features. So they added testing and verification. So they go through all the items, make sure that they work. They switch out everything that might be cracked, like a screen or something similar. They offer 1-year warranty. So you get trust into the system. I know if I buy this phone, I have a warranty for 1 year. So if it breaks, I will get a new one. And they added a 30-day money back guarantee. So with those 4 things, they started to get traffic. People wanting to switch in their phones and people wanting to buy electronics from them. And that's the same thing we did in Telenor. So we added warranty, we did inspections. And also because we're the largest mobile operator in Norway, people are inclined to trust that brand. So that's just one way of a good way of thinking about this business, and maybe some of you will select this for the term project. So that's a little bit of background. Any questions on this example? Okay, great. And then the next example is that a marketplace can open up unique supply. So you don't really have to, it's fine that you're adding features, but you're also opening up unique supply that no one ever opened up before. So it was not transparent. So it started with Craigslist. Brokers could go on there and put vacation homes on there. And then HomeAway and VRBO did the same thing with a bit more features, but with listing-based fees. So their market was brokers. They wanted brokers to put vacation homes on their site. And then Airbnb came along and they figured out, most people who has an apartment, they have supply because they're not in their apartment their entire time and they might want to rent it out. So how about building a marketplace that includes all the apartments from all the people who want to rent out their apartments in the entire world? And since they were able to build trust into that model, remember we talked about features, they saw traffic in that model. So people actually want to stay at somebody else's apartment, and it grew rapidly. And then this company called HipCamp came along. And they said, okay, most of Airbnb's apartments are in cities. For city tourists, for instance, if you go to a city, you might rent an Airbnb. But many people want unique experiences in the nature or wilderness where they can go to campsites, cabins, RV parks, public parks. So we try to put that supply online so it's searchable for people so they can find more unique places to go. And that really resonated with the marketplace. So HipCamp was even able to verticalize Airbnb and build out a new category. And HipCamp is also a business you can select for your term project. And I think it's a very interesting one. Okay, any questions? Rick, is this understandable?
It is.
Okay, great. So let's move on. What we've seen in the last few years, we were investing in marketplaces with FJ Labs, was that there's these marketplaces coming along that offers end-to-end transactions. So what do I mean by that? It means that the marketplace takes responsibility of a larger part of the transaction. So this business called Instacaro in Brazil, they promise to sell your used car in under 1 hour. So what you basically have to do is that you have to drive the car to one of their inspection points, and they complete an inspection. They decide on the pricing with their pricing models because they have the advantage of having done multiple cars of all kinds of brands and models. They take photos, nice ones, and publishes the listing, and then they facilitates what we call a reverse auctions. So dealers have to auction for the cars, the used cars. So that makes sure that you get the highest price possible. So you solve the pricing problem that way. Because remember, there's no Kelly Blue Book in this market. Then they complete the documentation and they give cash to the seller regardless if they sell the car or not within the 1 hour. So you see that it reduces the friction that we talked about for the seller significantly. Normally it takes weeks for you to sell your car. You have to meet a bunch of people. You have to set aside time. You have to deal with documentation, all this kind of stuff. You have to understand what your car is worth, and they takes care of everything. Obviously they take a margin, but this model has been really effective, not only in Brazil, but many markets, because it's worth paying a little bit to get out of the hassle and move on, and maybe you're going to buy a new car or move or something. So that's just a great example of an end-to-end marketplace. Another one is Zillow, that does homes in the US, this company, and Open Door. That is just the same alley. So we've spent a lot of time going through examples. We're gonna dig into evaluating the business model a little bit towards the end. And some of you were mentioning that you want to understand more about business model, finance, and that kind of stuff in this class. So I put together a few simple slides to just understand the difference between various marketplaces and how their business model work and how you evaluate them. So there's essentially three models for marketplaces at the moment. The first one is double commit. It's what we call double commit. It's a complex model. Is what Craigslist is built on, and Letgo. So it means that only discovery happens online. So if you want to buy something, you find the listing, you have to start a tedious conversation or negotiate on price across different ways of communication, online, phone call, SMS, that kind of stuff. And then you have to arrange a meetup or maybe a delivery. And then you have to arrange payment. Is it going to be cash, check? I understand you guys still deal in checks over in the States. I never understood that, but fine. So there's all these cumbersome things, and that's a double commit marketplace. The next one is a buyer picks. So here you have, for instance, in Airbnb or Etsy, you have a lot of product variety on the page. So you want to decide where you're going to stay if you look at a certain city on Airbnb. You want to understand what kind of features there are. So the buyer always have to pick. So you find the listing and you decide on the purchase. You fill in, your address and payment details, and you pay and you receive delivery. So a lot more of the transaction is actually facilitated online. Airbnb takes responsibility of the payment and all that kind of stuff. So this is very effective in building traffic. The last model is supplier picks, and this has been highly effective. So it basically means that the transaction happens without any selection on the buyer side. So what do I mean by that? I mean it's standardized supply. So for instance, Uber, if you're taking an Uber, I can't in Norway, unfortunately. It's not allowed by the government, and I miss it. If you decide to take an Uber, you don't care if it's a Ford or a Chevrolet. You don't care if the driver is a man or a woman. You don't care what color the car is. You only care about getting from A to B at a predetermined price. So you just click the pickup button. And that means that there's a job sent out into the marketplace, and the first driver who accepts it gets the job. And that's what we mean by supplier picks. And that makes the process so easy on the buyer side that it can grow really quickly, like Uber did. Because as you go along, you'll have more people trusting in the service and payment. I remember the first time I stepped out of an Uber without paying was a great experience because it reduces friction. And another example is a business called HomeTree, which we mentioned previously, that does boilers, heaters, and that kind of stuff. As they break down, you go on HomeTree and you get the person coming over with a new boiler or heater, and they install it and they leave. So what you care about is, essentially, you don't care about who the person is or or gender or any of that stuff. You care about, okay, do they have the boiler and heater I need? Do they have insurance? Can I trust them to show up at the assigned time? And HomeTree was able to facilitate all of these things. So you just go on their marketplace, you click, okay, my heater is broken, one click, payment, a person shows up at your door with a new heater and he or she installs it. So that's one other example of supplier pick marketplace. All right. Any questions on this one? We'll move along here. We're going to touch briefly on the different business models. You can go back and read this slide later also if you want. So a listing fee and visibility is listing-based business model. That means that if you're running a business that makes their money on listings or visibility, so visibility means that people pay to get their listing prioritized higher to increase the probability that somebody is going to buy whatever you're listing. So if you're doing one of these two, listing fee or visibility, you're doing all your decisions based on generating listing volume. So you want more listing into the marketplace. So that means that you don't build out features. You don't build out information for certain categories because it's not going to help you move a lot of volume or make more money. So the opposite to that is transaction-based. So that means that you're adding features for convenience as a main strategy to get people to transact. So you want the purchase experience to become easier. So people are more inclined to transact because you are able to get a piece of that transaction value. And that's basically software as a service is the one part. And the other one is called a rake or a transaction fee. So let's spend a little bit of time on software as a service. You'll also recognize this in the open table case. What these businesses normally do is that they build out a software system or a software or some kind of information that will help suppliers to access the marketplace. So take, for instance, in Open Table, they started with building software for restaurants so they could know the seating patterns in the restaurants, they could manage HR, they could know how much of the capacity they were running at, and then they built a marketplace later on so people could actually book seating in that restaurant at specific times. So that's highly effective in building the supplier side because all the restaurants wanted that software because it made their operations easier. And then later on, all the consumers wanted to go on opentable.com to find and book restaurants because, well, there was so many restaurants available because they had the software in the first place. So that's a software as a service based model where the supplier side pays a subscription fee to access to a system or software, excuse me, and the demand side later comes on because it's valuable for them to get into that supply. So the other part is a rake or a transaction fee. It basically means that since you facilitate and take responsibility for the transaction, you take 10 to 25% of the price as a fee. So Airbnb does this. It takes on both sides. So if you're a host, you pay 3% of the listing value. If you're a guest, you pay 6 to 15%, for instance. All right. So we mentioned these mobile-first marketplaces, which are generalists. They're trying just to create Craigslist on mobile. We see a trend that they they try to add features like the shipping and logistics and take care of all the payment as well, to increase the traffic and protect against competitors that are verticalizing their categories. So a bit more technical, not very technical, but a bit more technical and very, very important. Unit economics. I can't say that enough. So for you to understand if a marketplace is going to have potential to become profitable, you need to understand unit economics. So what do I mean by that? It means by every customer I serve or every transaction I facilitate, do I make a contribution margin? So a contribution margin is an incremental profit per each transaction. And if I make a contribution margin, I get a lot of cash to cover my fixed costs. And it basically means I can add more and more customers on a fixed cost base. And that just means that the company can grow in terms of revenue. So let's go through the reverse pyramid. So the first thing you look at is gross merchandise value. Yeah, the pyramid will determine lifetime value. That's important to start with. So the first thing you start with is gross merchandise value. So how much cash in terms of transactions move through the marketplace. So for Uber, for instance, that would be if you pay $10 for a ride, the driver keeps $2. And the driver keeps $8 and Uber gets $2. So they do a 20% transaction fee or a rake. So the gross merchandise value is the $10. So they will report that on their books as revenue. But as you deduct discounts and promotions, and as you incorporate that 20% take rate, the revenue on that ride will be $2, right? And then you'll have some cost of goods sold associated with that. Uber might have some IT costs, very slim. They don't have any inventory, I guess. And you arrive at the gross margin. And the next thing you have to subtract out to get the contribution margin is the sales and marketing costs that you had to spend to get that customer. And then you arrive at the contribution margin. So the thing to note here is that revenue, it scales with frequency. So let's say you were happy about doing that Uber ride that first time. You paid $10 and you were so happy that you're doing it every week for the next year. So 52 times that year. But Uber, they only sunk in the sales and marketing costs to get you through the door the first time, right? So if you have high recurrence, or if the customer has high recurrence on their purchase, you're going to get a really scaled contribution margin because it scales on the sales and marketing costs. So that's something we want to see. So when we determine what is attractive, to break down customer acquisition costs a bit first, it's all the marketing and sales costs divided by the number of new paying users from paid channels. So maybe you've used Facebook or a TV commercial or just display advertising online, Google search words, AdWords, that kind of stuff, and you see where the customers come from. You are able to attribute the marketing and sales cost to those customers who actually convert into becoming paying customers, and you will understand your customer acquisition cost, which is basically the investment it takes to get a customer to join your service, because you have to tell them in some kind of way that you have a service and it gives them a benefit, like Uber. So a high potential marketplace has a 12-month lifetime value. So within 12 months, it has a lifetime value that is above 2 times customer acquisition cost. And that is it's a very important number. So let's say, before we leave this slide, let's just say that you did the rides with Uber every week for $10. you spend 500 to, let's say 500, you spend 520, but let's say $500. So Uber will be able to take 20% of that number and book that in revenue. So that's $100. And let's say they have, in relation to that sale, they don't have any cost of goods sold because it's only IT development for them. So that means that the gross margin is $100. So if I was a manager at Uber in marketing, how much will I spend to acquire future customers? I would spend a maximum of $50. But if I could spend, let's say I could spend $20 at first and then another 10 that year to keep the customer coming back, because remember, in the States there's competition from Lyft. When I lived in Singapore, there was competition from Grab. So you need to calculate that you're going to spend cash on marketing to keep the recurrence going. So if you then have $100 in gross margin and you end up at 50, that's 2 times customer acquisition cost, and that's a very attractive marketplace. So I assume that Uber has a lot higher, maybe between 5 and 10 or even higher than that, because it removes so much friction and it's so convenient for users. So this is a bit technical. Is there any questions on this one? No questions? I hope everybody was able to understand where I was trying to go with this. If not, you can revisit. This is posted to Canvas, so you can revisit it and go through it on your own. So last slide and last idea I want to leave you with, the relationship between value and recurrence. So we have talked about this a little bit on the previous slide, recurrence, but it's also valuable to look at in terms of order value. So it will tell you if it's attractive. So in the lower right rectangle, that's where we never want to see a business. So that means that there's a low purchase frequency and there's low average order value. So in relation to the previous slide, it was going to be very, very hard to make a profit. So for instance, Ship, it's a company that folded 2 years ago. They were trying to build a marketplace for people to come and pick up packages or mail that you wanted to send and deliver it to UPS. Obviously, they couldn't charge that much, and you don't have packages sitting at your home that often that you want to send. So you might as well go to UPS and ship it yourself. So this was an example of a marketplace that didn't offer any attractive extra features or attractive frequency or attractive order value. So it didn't work. The same with HomeJoy, basically a marketplace for janitors that came and did most things. They could mow their lawn or fix lamps, etc. But still, it was never attached to a product or a feature. So the order value was too low and the frequency was obviously too low because you don't need a janitor that often. So we never want to see a marketplace in the lower left corner, and it's interesting to think about while you're going through your term project to kind of try to place your business in this illustration. So where do we want to see marketplaces? We want to see them in all the other rectangles. So you can have high average order value and low purchase frequency, like Airbnb and HomeTree, because the order value is so high that you can defend the low purchase frequency because you're also taking a transaction fee of the transaction. You can also have low average order value but high recurrence, high frequency, like Uber. We just went through that as an example. Instacart is kind of the same. So that's all fine. But the holy grail, and what we haven't seen a lot of, and is probably the trend over the next decade, is business-to-business marketplaces. So that's the upper right rectangle, it's two companies, one called Flexport and one called Proxy. Proxy is an online fish market. So fishers can go on the platform and they can list their catch, and restaurants will go on the same system, same platform, and buy your catch, and then you'll facilitate delivery to that restaurant. It's a business outside of France, and it's very interesting. And it's also one you can select for your term project. And the other one in the US, you may have heard of this company. It's starting to become very popular. It's called Flexport. So Flexport is basically a shipping marketplace. So let me add a little bit of context on why that is valuable. Before Flexport, if you had let's say you had a business in Salt Lake and you were producing goods in China, you had to get that shipped to Salt Lake. So that meant that you had to work with 6 to 8 parties to get those goods shipped. You needed to ship it from the factory in China to the port on the Chinese side, and then you needed to ship it from the Chinese port to a port likely in California, and then you need a company to ship it to a distribution center on the US side, then to a warehouse in Utah before it's delivered to your business. So the problem with this is that for each of these steps, you have to check with multiple suppliers via phone, fax, and compare prices. So remember, no price transparency, very difficult communication. That is, as we talked about earlier, friction. So you have no overview of how the data flows through the end-to-end shipping process for you. And that is very painful and takes a lot of time, and may also hurt your business. So it may be more beneficial if you have an overview of when your goods is actually arriving, so they can arrive at the anticipated time, so you can run your business more efficiently. So what Flexport does is that they build a layer on top of that, all that complexity. So it makes it easier for you as a business owner to look at that shipment, book all the different steps of the shipping process, and communicate with all of them at the same time, and also see the pricing. So you can also choose Flexport for your term project. It's a very interesting company, might even do an IPO soon. They take on a very difficult endeavor, but I think it's a super interesting company, because this is a very entrenched, the global shipping industry is a very entrenched industry.